The evening had begun like any other, with soft golden lights filling the spacious dining room and the gentle clink of fine china punctuating the quiet conversation. Lila sat across from Mason, her hands resting over her rounded belly, a soft smile playing on her lips as she imagined the child growing inside her. She had expected this night to be warm, filled with laughter and the comforting presence of the man she loved, the man who had promised to cherish her always. Mason, at first glance, appeared attentive, nodding at her stories and offering the occasional reassuring glance. But beneath the surface, a storm of ambition and desire raged within him, one that had little space for tenderness, little patience for the reality of fatherhood. Mason's mind wandered as he listened half-heartedly, his gaze slipping toward his phone that buzzed incessantly in his pocket. He had learned long ago that success demanded sacrifices he would gladly make in the name of wealth and status. The mistress, a younger woman with ambition as calculated as his own, was waiting for him, and he felt a thrill he hadn't felt in months. Lila's pregnancy, though precious in theory, had become a burden in his eyes, a tether tying him to responsibilities he found tedious. Each movement of her hand on her belly reminded him of a future he no longer desired, a life he felt constrained by. The conversation between them continued, but Mason's mind was elsewhere, spinning through messages from the mistress, recalling their secret plans, their hidden rendezvous. He smiled faintly at Lila, the motion hollow, detached, masking the eagerness that pulsed beneath the surface. The warmth that Lila expected from her husband, the reassurance that she had chosen well in loving him, was absent. He sipped his wine, checking the time, calculating the perfect moment to slip away unnoticed. Finally, the chance presented itself. A subtle excuse, a fleeting gesture, and Mason was gone from the room, leaving Lila with a polite nod and an insincere promise that he would return soon. The door closed behind him, and the room's warmth suddenly felt like a mockery. The soft glow of the chandelier illuminated her realization: the man she loved had abandoned her, not in anger, but in deliberate choice. He had chosen desire over duty, pleasure over family, leaving her pregnant, alone, and shattered. That night marked the beginning of heartbreak, a night when trust was shattered, and Lila understood, with devastating clarity, that her life would never be the same. Lila had noticed the subtle changes in Mason over the past few months, the way he lingered longer in the office, the sudden late-night meetings he couldn't explain, the way his attention seemed to drift whenever she tried to speak to him about the pregnancy. She had tried to ignore the gnawing unease inside her, convincing herself that he was just stressed, that he loved her and their child, that he wouldn't let anything come between them. But that fragile sense of hope shattered in a single, horrifying moment. She had been tidying the study, stacking papers and straightening folders, when Mason's phone had fallen from the edge of the desk. It buzzed relentlessly, and curiosity mingled with dread as she reached for it. Her fingers shook as she unlocked the screen, and the first message that appeared made her stomach drop: "Can't wait to see you tonight. I need you." Her breath caught, and she scrolled further, each new message more damning than the last. Dates, secret meetings, whispered promises, all evidence of an affair he had hidden from her for months. The betrayal was meticulous, calculated, and utterly merciless. Lila sank into the nearest chair, covering her face with trembling hands. She couldn't breathe properly, the world tilting around her as the reality of Mason's choices pressed down on her. Her husband, the man who had once vowed to love and protect her, had been giving his heart and attention to someone else, someone who would never carry his child, never feel the weight of responsibility or the fear that came with growing a life inside her. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was profoundly physical in its implications. He had abandoned not just her, but the child they were meant to raise together. Tears streamed down her face, hot and uncontrollable, leaving her shaking and exhausted. She tried to form words, to scream, to call him, to demand answers, but her voice failed her. Every memory of their time together, the laughter, the shared dreams, the quiet evenings imagining their future, now felt poison, twisted by the knowledge that they had been illusions, shadows masking his deceit. She sank further, clutching her belly as if her touch alone could shield her child from the reality of the world outside. The room felt impossibly cold, and the silence around her pressed like a weight on her chest. She couldn't reconcile the man she loved with the man who had betrayed her so utterly. Shock, grief, and disbelief merged into one consuming wave, leaving her trembling, fragile, and utterly alone. Lila realized, with gut-wrenching clarity, that the life she had imagined, the family she had trusted would be theirs, had been stolen in the cruelest way possible, and that night would forever mark the moment she understood just how deeply she had been abandoned. The following days blurred into a haze of fear and exhaustion for Lila. The apartment that had once felt like a safe haven now seemed like a prison, each corner a reminder of Mason's absence and betrayal. Her pregnancy, once a source of joy and anticipation, had become a magnifying glass for every anxiety she had ever harbored. Every flutter of the baby's movement brought both comfort and a pang of fear, a reminder that she was utterly alone in protecting this tiny, fragile life. Simple tasks became monumental challenges. Bending to pick up a fallen object or climbing the stairs left her breathless and trembling. She had no one to lean on, no hand to steady her when panic struck, and the weight of responsibility pressed down on her chest with relentless force. Lila's mind replayed Mason's betrayal again and again, each memory twisting the knife a little deeper. She could still feel the coldness in his eyes, the casual dismissal of her fear, the way he had walked away without a second thought. The knowledge that he had willingly abandoned both her and their unborn child gnawed at her, leaving a hollow ache that no distraction could soothe. Nights were the worst. The silence of the apartment seemed to amplify her heartbeat, her worries echoing off the walls. She imagined all the ways the world could fail her, all the dangers that might befall her and her baby with no one there to intervene. Her body began to mirror her anxiety, muscles tense, stomach churning, and fatigue setting in deep. The isolation made every pang of discomfort feel like a crisis. She called her mother, her friends, anyone she could think of, but most were away for the holidays, and some offered advice that sounded distant and hollow, incapable of bridging the gap between fear and action. Desperation began to build, a sense that she had to rely solely on herself if either of them, the child or she, was to survive. And then, as tears blurred her vision one late evening, she made a decision. She could not allow herself to be consumed by fear, could not let Mason's betrayal dictate her fate. She would survive, for herself and for the life growing inside her. She began planning in small ways, stocking her kitchen with nourishing foods, researching ways to stay healthy while alone, and ensuring that she could respond quickly if anything went wrong. Her resolve hardened with each passing hour. By the time the sun rose on a bleak, gray morning, Lila felt a fragile strength settling into her bones. Fear still lingered, but it was tempered by determination. She would endure the storm Mason had left her in, the physical strain, the emotional pain. She would protect her unborn child at all costs. Alone and vulnerable, yes, but also fiercely resilient. That night, she whispered a promise to her baby, one that was carried in the soft tremor of her voice: "We will survive. We will make it through." And in that vow, Lila found the courage to face whatever came next, refusing to let betrayal define her life. Ethan sat alone in the vast living room of his mansion, the walls echoing with a quiet that had settled over him like a second skin. The fire flickered softly in the hearth, casting warm shadows across the polished floors, yet it did little to warm the emptiness he felt inside. 2 years had passed since the accident that had taken his wife from him, leaving him with only memories and the silence of a home that once overflowed with laughter. He had poured himself into work, into building his business empire, yet even wealth and success had not been able to fill the void. Nights were the hardest. He would wander the hallways, imagining her presence, the soft sound of her voice, the gentle rhythm of her hand on his chest as they had fallen asleep together. Despite his riches, his life lacked the family he had always longed for. The quiet dinners, the empty bedrooms, the nursery he had never used, they were constant reminders of what he had lost. Ethan longed for a chance to nurture, to care for someone beyond himself, to protect and guide a life in a way he had once shared with his wife. The thought of holding a child, of being a steady presence in a young life, had begun to occupy his mind more often than he cared to admit. He had almost convinced himself that this desire would remain unfulfilled, that grief would forever outweigh hope. That evening, as he drove through the quiet streets of the city, snow beginning to fall lightly, he noticed a figure struggling along the sidewalk. The streetlights glinted off the wet pavement, illuminating a woman whose form seemed small and fragile against the growing winter storm. Something about her caught his attention, not just the obvious vulnerability but a certain quiet strength in the way she moved, pushing forward despite the wind and cold. He slowed his car instinctively, feeling an inexplicable pull, a curiosity mixed with concern, that made him park nearby. He watched as she stumbled, shivering, wrapping her arms around her belly in a protective embrace. Ethan's heart tightened, the sight stirred a deep protective instinct he hadn't felt in years. He noticed the way her coat hung loosely, how the storm seemed determined to overwhelm her, and in that moment, he realized that this wasn't just chance. Something about her presence resonated with the longing he had carried for so long, a silent echo of the family he had once dreamed of having. In stark contrast to Mason, whose ambition and desire for pleasure had led him to abandon his pregnant wife, Ethan's attention was filled with care, empathy, and an instinct to protect. He felt an urgent need to step forward, to offer warmth, safety, and support to this woman who seemed on the edge of collapse. In that snowy evening, a chance encounter became the first thread connecting two lives destined to intertwine, a pregnant woman abandoned by cruelty, and a man whose heart, though scarred by loss, still held the capacity for love, hope, and family. Ethan approached cautiously, his hands raised slightly to show he meant no harm, the crisp snow crunching softly beneath his shoes. Lila froze the moment she noticed him, instinctively pulling her coat tighter around her body and tightening her grip on her belly. Her eyes, wide with fear and suspicion, darted toward him as if measuring whether he was friend or threat. The storm had left her exhausted, shivering, and raw with emotion, and the idea of a stranger approaching only amplified her anxiety. Yet, there was something in the way he moved, slow, deliberate, careful, that made her hesitate before turning to flee. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, his voice warm and steady, cutting through the roar of the wind. "You shouldn't be out here alone." He kept his distance, allowing her space while his eyes took in the tremble in her hands, the way she rocked slightly on her feet, trying to brace herself against the cold. Lila shook her head, refusing to meet his gaze, her voice barely audible over the wind. "I'm fine," she said, though the lie trembled on her lips. She wanted to move past him, to keep walking, to hide somewhere safe and warm, yet her body was heavy with exhaustion, and her limbs refused to cooperate fully. Ethan stepped a little closer, careful not to crowd her, offering a pair of gloves and a scarf he had pulled from the car. "Please," he said gently, "take these. You're freezing. Let me help you." His calm, protective presence made it difficult for her to respond with hostility, though weariness still clouded her eyes. She hesitated, fighting the urge to decline, to assert independence despite the tremor in her limbs and the rapid beating of her heart. Finally, driven by exhaustion and the warmth his items promised, she accepted the scarf, wrapping it around her neck with trembling fingers. The smallest spark of trust ignited, fragile but undeniable. Ethan noticed immediately, his smile softening. "There," he said quietly, "much better. You're safe now, at least for a moment." He kept his tone even, avoiding any hint of condescension, instead projecting a steady reassurance that whispered silently to her battered spirit, "You are not alone." For the first time since Mason's betrayal, Lila felt a flicker of hope. The fear that had kept her tethered to despair loosened slightly as she glanced up at him, noting the genuine concern etched across his face. In the days that followed Mason's departure, a calm settled over Lila that felt both unfamiliar and comforting. For the first time since her world had been upended, she didn't feel the gnawing anxiety of abandonment pressing on her chest. Instead, she found herself in the quiet warmth of Ethan's home, a space that seemed to breathe with patience and care. He gave her the freedom to rest, to move at her own pace, to simply exist without judgment or expectation. And in that freedom, a bond began to form, subtle at first, then steadily deepening with each shared moment. Their conversations started cautiously. Lila spoke sparingly about her life, her fears, and the child growing inside her, while Ethan listened with genuine attentiveness, never interrupting or dismissing her feelings. He shared stories of his late wife, of the dreams they had once held, and of the quiet loneliness that had settled over his life since her passing. In these exchanges, Lila began to notice the gentleness in his voice, the thoughtfulness in his gestures, and the sincerity that lay beneath his composed exterior. Each word and glance carried warmth, a reassurance that she had been starved of for far too long. As the days passed, their moments of quiet companionship grew into laughter and subtle joy. Ethan would tease her lightly over small things, like the way she sipped her tea or how she wrapped her scarf too tightly, and Lila would respond with hesitant chuckles that gradually became genuine smiles. They shared meals together, cooked simple dishes in the kitchen, and found themselves lingering in conversation long after the task at hand was done. The mansion, once a place of solitude and grief, began to feel alive with human connection and possibility. Together, they began to dream aloud about the future. Lila imagined a life where her child grew up surrounded by love and stability, and Ethan added visions of a family filled with laughter, holidays celebrated together, and quiet evenings by the fire. Each shared dream became a small bridge, connecting their hearts across the space of past pain. Lila, who had believed happiness was no longer possible, felt the first glimmer of hope. She noticed, too, the way Ethan spoke to her belly with quiet affection, the gentle way he placed his hand near hers when they sat together, the patience he showed when she moved slowly or tired easily. His tenderness was never forced, it was natural, instinctive, and unwavering. Slowly, walls she had built around her heart began to crumble, and the possibility of love, built on respect and care rather than fear or betrayal, began to take root. In the midst of her lingering pain, Lila allowed herself to hope. In Ethan's presence, she discovered that joy could coexist with grief, laughter could follow tears, and love could grow even after betrayal. The bond they shared, born from chance and nurtured through kindness, became the foundation for a new chapter, one where happiness was not only possible but deserved. The quiet anticipation that had settled over the mansion shifted abruptly one crisp morning when Lila's contractions began, strong and relentless. Ethan, ever vigilant, was instantly at her side, guiding her gently through each wave of pain. His hands held hers firmly, steadying her with a calm presence that contrasted sharply with the chaos she felt within her own body. She gripped him tightly, drawing courage from his unwavering support, knowing that she was no longer alone in this journey. The private doctor arrived swiftly, already prepared for the delivery, but it was Ethan's steadiness that became Lila's anchor. He whispered encouragements, reminded her to breathe, and offered quiet praise for her strength. Every movement, every adjustment he made, bringing her pillows, adjusting blankets, gently rubbing her back, was an act of care and reassurance. For Lila, who had known only abandonment and betrayal, it was transformative. The fear that had clutched her heart for months loosened in the warmth of his presence. Hours passed, tense and exhausting, until at last, the sound of a newborn's cry pierced the air. Relief, joy, and disbelief mingled into a profound wave of emotion. Ethan leaned forward as the tiny form was placed into his hands, cradling the newborn with reverence. The child's small fists curled instinctively, her skin soft and warm, and in that moment, Ethan felt a profound peace he hadn't experienced since his wife's death. The longing he had carried for a family, the emptiness of his years alone, all dissolved into this single, miraculous presence. Lila, exhausted but radiant, gazed at Ethan as he held their child. Her eyes, filled with tears of relief and newfound hope, saw not just a man who had guided her through labor, but a partner capable of love, protection, and unwavering devotion. His gentle touch, his soft murmurs to the baby, the way he met her gaze with quiet pride and reverence, painted the picture of the father figure she had longed to see by her side. As Ethan handed the child into Lila's arms, she felt the final pieces of her heart shift into place. The mansion, once silent and somber, now resonated with life, laughter, and the soft, steady rhythm of a family newly begun. In the delicate breaths of the newborn, in the careful, tender hands of Ethan, Lila discovered the reality of hope, healing, and love. The past's pain remained a memory, but the future, filled with the promise of family and protection, stretched out before them, bright and unbroken. That day marked not just a birth, but a miracle, the beginning of the life they would build together, a life founded on trust, safety, and the joy of love reclaimed. Weeks had passed since the birth of Lila and Ethan's child, and life had begun to settle into a rhythm that felt both natural and profoundly comforting. Mason, who had once wielded power through intimidation and deceit, now faced the inevitable consequences of his choices. Legal actions, public exposure of his selfishness, and the undeniable truth of his abandonment left him with little room to maneuver. He had lost not only the trust of Lila but the opportunity to be part of the family he had once taken for granted. His presence no longer loomed over her life. The man who had caused so much pain had been stripped of the power he thought he wielded. In the meantime, Ethan had ensured that Lila and their daughter would never have to face uncertainty or fear again. The mansion, once a quiet testament to solitude, had transformed into a warm, vibrant home filled with laughter, love, and the subtle rhythms of family life. He had taken care to provide not just physical safety but emotional security, attending to every need with gentle patience. From quiet evenings by the fire to playful mornings with their child, he nurtured a sense of stability that Lila had never experienced with Mason. As the next Christmas approached, the house shimmered with the glow of festive lights. Lila moved gracefully among the decorations, placing ornaments with care, while their baby giggled from Ethan's arms, reaching for the twinkling lights with tiny, curious fingers. Ethan watched them both, a soft smile tugging at his lips, feeling a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with wealth or success. He whispered a silent thank you to the chance encounter, to the twists of fate, to the storm that had brought Lila into his life. In that moment, surrounded by love and light, he felt complete. Finally, the family he had always longed for was here, tangible and thriving. Lila, watching him with eyes full of gratitude, realized that she hadn't just survived Mason's betrayal. She had found a love built on respect, safety, and genuine care. She saw in Ethan a partner, a protector, and a loving father figure who would stand by her and their child no matter what challenges arose. Together, they had built a family not born of convenience or obligation, but of mutual trust, tenderness, and unwavering devotion. The three of them, mother, father, and child, stood together by the fire, laughter and soft voices mingling with the warm glow of Christmas lights. The house, once filled with shadows of loss and fear, now resonated with hope, love, and the quiet certainty of belonging. In each other, they had found a future bright with promise, a life rebuilt from pain into a home overflowing with joy and unwavering connection.